The Future History of Energy and Transportation. Documenting the paradigm shift from the era of oil and internal combustion to the era of robotics. By Julian Cox. Narrated by the author with the aid of an artificial intelligence. Chapter 5. Of Capital Intensity. Just about any startup of any size tends to involve someone taking the initiative to put time and money into either themselves or a company of people, owing to some reason to believe that future customers will value a resulting product or service and value it sufficiently to pay for the exercise of both building the company to perform the value add, in the form of capital expenditure, CapEx, like buying buildings, computers and other machines, often termed plant and machinery, as well as paying for the exercise of adding value on an ongoing basis, in the form of operating expenses, OpEx, like paying suppliers for services and paying people to come to work and where applicable, to operate the machines. Naturally, there are ways and means to most ends. For example, one could swap CapEx for OpEx by renting the building and even the machines in it. Subcontracting the entire manufacturing job, retailing or seeking royalties on a license to a design exist among many options. Apple, for example, is primarily a software and design company. Designs are also essentially software. Apple subcontracts out most of its capital-intensive operations to companies like Foxconn, while seeking to concentrate value realization in its software design, hardware design, marketing, merchandising, distribution and retail operations where it concentrates its investments. Often when growing a company, the boundary of OpEx and CapEx is blurred because it takes OpEx not just to maintain a staff headcount but to grow a staff headcount. It is not blurred on the books but more in terms of investor and management perceptions where OpEx in particular can be viewed as investment-like or cash burn-like depending whether there is trust in outcomes or the lack of it. Founders typically experience investing in growing a headcount for a business, with little meaningful distinction from investing in plant and machinery. Both cost money, cash flows, and both are generally required to make more of the product to serve more customers. Getting rid of OpEx to expose profits to the max while expecting sales turnover to grow regardless, is a normal shareholder preoccupation and an everyday source of tension with management. Certainly in Western business culture in recent decades, the old J.C. Penney maxim "I would rather have 1% of 100 men's productivity than 100% of my own," while it still sounds sensible, has not been generally in favor in business. The most extreme exception to this traditional view of investing has come about with the advent of software companies. Arguably, since the date of print publishing, there has been a type of company whose primary value proposition is in the form of human intelligible and machine reproducible information, far more so than the hardware these companies rely upon to get their product to market. Microsoft was known simply as a software publisher before it was known as a tech giant or as a tech stock. Instead of CapEx sunk into plant and machinery anywhere in its value chain, Microsoft focused primarily on OpEx, people writing software. To grow its customer base and sales turnover, Microsoft essentially required extraordinarily little incremental investment. The value add being charged for was millions of copies of the same information on a floppy disk, and then a CD and finally sent from a web server across the internet. So successful was this business at exposing ever larger volumes of profits without correspondingly large incremental expenditures on CapEx, due to licensing an intangible product, that it propelled its CEO at times from a mildly privileged college dropout to the world's richest living person. More importantly, Microsoft divided the Western worldview into capital-intensive businesses that were always there before the rise of Microsoft, and for the most part still are, and tech companies that can become very profitable, very quickly with comparatively little money invested. The generally accepted takeaway from all of that: capital-intensive businesses are old, long established and impossible to grow quickly, and competing with businesses of this nature is tremendously difficult, owing to the unattractive rates of return on large amounts of capital required to achieve economies of scale, to compete on a level playing field and to avoid being crushed by the incumbents. Instead, investors looking for a good investment among capital-intensive industry would pick one or more incumbent with a view to enjoying reliable dividends from reliable profits and perhaps to leverage uninspiring returns with margin and derivatives trades, or by seeking to time trades to buy while market perceptions appear to undervalue strong business fundamentals and respectable management, in the mode of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. Tech companies, on the other hand, software companies in particular, are nominally considered young, require minimal capex to grow, and if successful can be expected to expose profits and free cash flows rapidly. Those that succeed are expected to exit a venture capital phase in a short span of perhaps 2 to 5 years and to grow exponentially on internally generated cash thereafter. The assumed countervailing risk here is that the tech arena presents a low capital barrier to entry for additional newcomers to enter and to swarm the market with variations on the theme of any idea that looks promising. Hence the traditional venture capital model to invest early in a basket of hopefuls, reap the winnings on the few that work out, and to exit those too as soon as possible, with no expectation that these companies will be around in decades, let alone 100 or more years' time. And yet all of this is an absolute fallacy. The distinction between the most successful capital-intensive companies and the most successful tech companies in terms of speed of growth and the age at which they achieved blue-chip status is, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable. No, this is not a case of going mad and ceasing to make any sense mid-sentence. Intel was founded in 1968 by the inventors of the integrated circuit and took 20 to 30 years to achieve blue-chip status, sequentially dominating simple logic chips, to RAM and then microprocessors. Microsoft and Apple are products of the late 1970s and took 20 to 30 years apiece to reach blue-chip status, commencing with the invention of the personal computer. Note that Foxconn was founded in 1974. Google, Amazon and Facebook are products of the mid-1990s that achieved gianthood in around 20 to 30 years, commencing with the invention of the public internet. What has passed out of received wisdom is that this is nothing new. The dividing line is not capex-intensive manufacturing versus the low capex tech company. Even some of the above, such as Apple, blur the distinction between hardware and software sufficiently to question it, but consider the following. Carnegie Steel founded 1892, U.S. Steel after merger 9 years later, and the world's first billion-dollar company at merger, Standard Oil. ExxonMobil is just a fragment of Standard Oil following its monopoly breakup. Shell, that innovated bulk oil tankers. The Edison General Electric Company, General Electric post-merger 3 years after its founding in 1889. The Bell Telephone Company, now AT&T following its monopoly breakup. Daimler, Otto Cycle Engine. Ford, Vanadium Steel and Rolling Production Line. Toyota, JIT Process innovated in 1938 within a year of founding. The list goes on and on. All of them achieved dominant blue-chip status within 20 to 30 years. Some of them became market monopolies, including Rockefeller's Standard Oil that made him the richest man to date, at least in disclosed wealth, that ever lived, since the invention of the US dollar to measure wealth in. These examples vary in the method of financing growth from selling shares, to selling franchises, to largely organic growth, and all of them have one thing in common. It is not capital intensity or the lack of it. They all seized on a new technology or a specific disruptive innovation and ran with it early and hard. Even a rare exception such as Procter & Gamble, that did not go from founding directly to blue-chip status, lingered as a medium-sized candle-making business facing technology disruption itself from the advent of the electric light bulb, when it seized upon a novel method of manufacturing soap, along with a business innovation in an early form of options incentives, and rode that directly to blue-chip scale within 20 to 30 years. McDonald's lingered for 18 years until Ray Kroc hit upon franchising systematic fast food service, achieving blue-chip status in less than 20 years thereafter. Koch Industries owes its prodigious wealth to a disruptive innovation in oil refining technology, courtesy of founder, Fred Koch. With the exception of some conglomerates assembled by mergers and acquisitions, it is more difficult to find an exception to this rule among very large industry incumbents of any age. We simply have not seen many, if any, novel new blue chips relating to vital services besides communications, particularly in the West, for approximately 100 years. Until now. Tesla Incorporated has simply followed a familiar pattern. If not the most common and ordinary pattern of achieving blue-chip status within 20 to 30 years. Founded in 2003, 18 years old at the time of writing, Tesla seized upon a specific innovation and ran with it early and hard, a lithium-ion battery with power density suitable for developing horsepower with exceptional efficiency, in a passenger vehicle, as well as energy density and cycle life sufficient to satisfy initial customers for range and longevity, on a predictable technology development and cost curve to pass through a tipping point to meet and exceed every customer requirement that could be satisfied with gasoline and engine technology and predictably beyond, to additional value-added capabilities and lowered total overall vehicle and running costs. A value proposition that is greatly augmented by compute power, software and sensor integration, onboard diagnostics and data networking, that is readily integrated with an electric drivetrain to achieve, in essence, transportation and energy distribution robotics. With a market cap at the time of writing of approximately $800 billion, it is self-evidently the case that attracting capital, or capital intensity as a concept, is not in and of itself a rate-limiting step. All else being equal, capital intensity is a barrier to scaling up to merely duplicate or follow an established industry leader. General Motors solved its early scaling issues by conglomerating Ford's competition and by luck or judgment, exposing a vulnerability in Ford's perhaps excessive standardization by providing customers the option of colors and trim opulence, relatively speaking, that found a market. Authors note, this lesson of history should not be overlooked in favor of an obsession with cost optimization, when contemplating robotaxi fleets. The market for discretionary luxury is real, readily affordable within newly exposed margins and incrementally profitable. Naturally, the market premium for luxury is predictably greater in a mobile relaxation and recreation space as opposed to a driver's vehicle. At the same time, the ability to expand a market for robotaxis to the price-constrained limits is impossible at the outset, prior to physically manufacturing hundreds of millions of robotaxis at a minimum. This is an important point. Mechanized passenger transportation as distinct from a rail car to transport coal is not a commodity, except at the price-constrained limits. For the bulk of the market by value, people tend to opt for the nicest form of transportation they can reasonably afford and frequently beyond that. Similarly with mobile phones. A discarded Nokia or Motorola from 2005 still works, while doing little or nothing to temper market demand for the latest smartphone. Standardized grid electricity is a commodity. Except for a market premium that can be charged qualitatively for brownout and blackout resistant electricity, wherever the grid is substandard, the market for electricity is for the lowest price conveniently available, regardless of customer wealth. Not so with cars, air transport or boats. Hence the excitement for nice cars as opposed to nice electricity. Nice robotaxis will matter, predictably, see, dynamics of autonomous mileage markets. The ability of manufacturing industry to deploy large amounts of capital efficiently and to deliver product differentiation in hardware and software adequate to attract customers to wait in line for products, instead of products waiting in inventory for customers, or worse, products supplied to distributors or customers on credit, readily begets capital, in search of gains. It should be mentioned that the rapid growth of Chinese manufacturing industry for export rests on a structural advantage in human labor cost. That is to say that Chinese workers do not inherently require significantly less by the way of clothing, food, shelter and the amenities of daily life relative to other working adult humans, but rather, the way in which cost of living and foreign exchange is structured, creates a labor cost advantage for China, coupled with labor abundance. This innovation, for want of a better term, alongside the Chinese government operating as a centralized venture capital fund, has allowed capital-intensive businesses to grow rapidly against incumbent Western industry head-on, without any need for significant technological innovation or product differentiation. Instead, the Chinese national formula simply undercuts foreign competition, even after the customer, not the Chinese supplier, arranges credit and absorbs the cost of interest as required to pay cash FOB, freight on board, or at the factory gate. Essentially, the Chinese national business model discounts price for cash flow. The demand this system creates for the supply of interest-bearing commercial credit, freight and shipping insurance and the opportunities to arbitrage hundreds of billions of dollars in goods and FX, foreign exchange, forever in transit on the world's shipping lanes, represents a vast incentive for Wall Street, City of London and similar to favor investment in offshoring Western industry, at the expense of localization, and so to lobby Western governments to cooperate with China's ambitions to dominate global industry, in clear conflict of interest with the global environment and the proper functioning of a Western representative democracy. Nevertheless, capital-intensive manufacturing industry in China has grown rapidly by evading the need to sink excessive cash into inventory, or to supply goods on credit to distributors or customers. Sinking cash into rapidly growing inventory is the killer of manufacturing, most especially during rapid growth. We will revisit this concept again when it comes to the market dynamics of introducing an autonomous ride-sharing fleet, specifically the attempt to form a monopoly, versus selling the cars and sharing the mileage revenues. In other words, energy and software revenues absent any cost denominator, but rather a profit also, for producing vehicles.